Spyro the Dragon's development is the story of three puzzle pieces connecting: marketing, creativity, and technology. After disappointing sales of Insomniac's first game, Disruptor, Mark Cerny, Insomniac's producer at the time, suggested targeting a younger demographic because unlike the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation lacked games for a young audience. Craig Stitt had suggested the idea of a game about dragons, and with that, Charles Zimbillis worked on a central dragon's design. And finally, Alex Hastings was already developing a graphical engine using a technique called level of detail, which married well with the idea of a flying dragon. In Spyro the Dragon, you play as Spyro, and your goal is to collect gems, save dragons and dragon eggs, progress through levels, realms, to eventually defeat Gnorc. It's a 3D platformer in the vein of Mario 64. From the start, the controls feel a little delayed because Spyro is a quadruped. With a little bit of learning, Spyro's responses to your input make sense and becomes intuitive. I realized my early struggles weren't really from the controls necessarily, but from the camera. The camera controls are limited to the horizontal X-axis and controlled by the L and R triggers. This makes judging jumps difficult in certain scenarios. I had to remind myself too that the analog sticks for the PlayStation were not standard yet. Spyro the Dragon was released a little over a year later from the PlayStation's first analog controller. And since the console had a 3-year period of sales without analog controls, it makes sense that the game wouldn't capitalize on camera controls using a second analog stick. However, I found myself really wishing it was there. Regardless of these issues, by the later levels you will be maneuvering Spyro quite well and have forgotten any early difficulties in controlling the little guy. The music is really good. Thanks to the high fidelity of the PlayStation, almost every level is scored with CD quality sound. Stuart Copeland composed and performed the entire soundtrack. There are some really great pieces and subtle uses of motif throughout. The levels are beautiful and cover a wide color palette. Each level has a specific number of gems, and you don't need any to complete the level, but you do need specific amounts of gems to go to the other realms to reach the final stages. Each level is sprinkled with wonderful character design. Levels are easy enough for seasoned players to complete, but to get all the gems, some levels will require creative thinking on the part of the player. Spyro makes use of one of the first LOD, or level of detail systems for the PlayStation. 3D games are created with triangles and textures. Every graphic processor has a limit to the number of these elements that can be computed at a given moment. An LOD system allows for fewer triangles and less detailed textures to be used for elements in the background, so that more triangles and clearer textures can be available for elements in the foreground. LOD systems are still used in modern games today, albeit they are far less noticeable as constraints have lessened. Spyro's LOD system was programmed by Alex Hastings, and it's a fantastic achievement, really taking Spyro's graphics to the next level. Spyro also uses clever mechanisms for disguising load times through each level. You will not once see a progress bar for loading. As you step through a portal to a level, Spyro will fly to his destination. It's during these times, and other subtle moments, that the game is actually loading. The game starts off as, well, awkward.
Nasty Gnorc is a simple creature. Simple! He has been contained in a remote world and is no threat to the Dragon Kingdom. No threat! Besides, he is ugly. Ugly? That does it!
Looks like I've got some things to do.
This is the only introduction of the protagonist. I didn't even know the dragonfly following you around was named Sparks, even though there's a voiceover credit for him. This can all be forgiven, but it seems odd to have dialogue, but none that develop the plot or the character. This almost disconnected feeling continues to run throughout the game in different ways. The bosses, for instance. There's no change in music or atmosphere to indicate that you are encountering a boss, something that was already a staple in gaming at the time. Another example are dragons you rescue. Sometimes they'll provide advice. However, to get that advice, it's often after you've already overcome the problem their advice seeks to help you with.
Fairies are always on your side, Spyro.
Too little, too late. The game also suffers from some difficulty balance. For instance, the final stages before the last boss are rather easy, but the actual fight for Gnorc, or Gnorc, is disproportionately hard. Don't get me wrong, The game's a joy to play. There are some really great moments throughout. You can tell that the game was made by a group of talented people new to game development. There are times when the game shows a lack of maturity in game design, and there are moments of shining brilliance. The game is fun to play despite its awkwardness and has some challenging moments beyond its basic platforming. If you like Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, then you might find this right up your alley. The strong emphasis on controls and playability is the game's anchor, but the balance issues and numerous other misaligned design choices keep it from being a perfect game. I give Spyro the Dragon for the PlayStation a 4 out of 5 stars. Hey Trish.
I know how much you like that Spyro game, so I got you this.